Guys, welcome to Bharadwaj IAS channel, which is specially meant for the coming prelims exams of UPSC on 4th October. And today I am going to start formally the lectures of modern history. And the first topic of today's discussion is the arrival of Europeans. And here we will try to have a new type of visualization of this European commerce. Guys, what happens, once we go and start this modern history, all of a sudden we find the arrival of Europeans. But if you go and see the whole history, especially the ancient history, you may find a linkages of this trade with the West. I think you may be well aware that in the ancient history, just in the post-modern period, India was having a brisk trade with the Roman world. In the first 3 centuries of Christian era, after the discovery of monsoon winds in 44 AD by a Greek navigator, Hippolus, India find a sudden rise of trade with the West, which has been proved by the archaeology and also in the writings of the Greek writers and also in Sangam literature. We have found large number of Roman coins, their temporary settlements, even the temples of the Roman traders has been excavated by the archaeologist at Muziris seaport lying in Kerala. So guys, the discovery of monsoon winds in the first century AD can be called as a driving force which had given a sudden rise of trade with the Western world, Roman Empire, you can say. And equally, you may be also aware that the Roman king Augustus had captured the North African territories like Egypt around 30 BCE, before Christ era. And after discovery of monsoon winds, this trade and time got shortened, and it was a turning point in the history of trade and commerce with the Western world. This trade and commerce was going in favor of India, and the Roman world was draining gold and silver to India. Even the writings of the Pliny is proving the same. And see what type of favor it was going in India. Even the author called as Pliny had requested the Roman king to put a ban on the Indian silk, pearls. So guys, try to have a link from here. What happens, when we start modern history, we simply started focusing on the arrival of the Europeans without knowing the linkages in the ancient history. So first we can say India was having a brisk trade with the Roman world in the early centuries of Christian era. After this, finally the Roman Empire collapsed due to the recurring invasion of the Hunas. Similarly, the Gupta Empire collapsed, and this trade gradually came to end. But even then, in post-Gupta period, we find references of trade with the East African territories. And finally, when the Arabs captured Multan and Sindh in 712 AD, for around 800 years, the trade with the West was monopolized by these Arabian traders. And guys, 800 years is a meaningful time. How many generations could have been passed? So from 8th century AD till the coming of Portuguese, almost 800 years, the Arabian traders were carrying the Indian goods, silk, cotton textile, spices, ivories, other handicraft items to the Roman world. And just see in this way, for 800 years, they may have got great addiction to the Indian goods. But finally, again, in 1453, when the eastern capital of Roman Empire, Constantinople, was captured by the Turk, then the state got a sudden setback because Indian goods was going to the Europe by the Roman traders. It were the merchants of Italy who were purchasing them and were supplying in the whole Europe. So this 1453 disturbance was a turning point which promoted the European kings to promote navigation to search out the direct sea route to India. And finally, in 1498, the same happened. After discovery of the new sea route direct to India, in 1498, it was a turning point in the world history because now India will have a direct trade with the Western world. In the same phase, in the world history, we find new types of development between trade between East and West. The trade became more organized, more stabilized, because it was patronized by the state or it was patronized by a joint stock company. Earlier, the trade was individualistic. तो व्यापार वाणिज्य तो पहले भी होता था, परंतु उसकी प्रकृति व्यक्तिगत थी। आधुनिक भारतीय इतिहास में जो नया ट्रेड स्टार्ट होता है, इट बिकेम मोर स्टेबलाइज्ड बिकॉज इट वाज पैट्रोनाइज्ड बाय द किंग एंड कंट्रोल्ड बाय द जॉइंट स्टॉक कंपनीज। इसको राजाओं का संरक्षण था और जॉइंट स्टॉक कंपनी द्वारा इसको नियंत्रित किया जा रहा था। Secondly, this trade and commerce of 15th-16th century was also guided by the promotion of Christianity in the East Indies. And a historian had commented that this new phase of trade and commerce was guided by the 3G: God, glory and gold. Promotion of Christianity, capital, and the glory of the nation. That is why 15th, 16th century in the world history is called as century of mercantilist revolution. So guys, here we will discuss the profile of some companies, because oftenly you can find one question on this theme. So here the Portuguese were the first who discovered the route, and since it was their labor, Vasco da Gama was helped by a Gujarati navigator called as Mazid. And after this discovery, the Roman Pope had granted monopoly to the Portuguese for 100 years. That is why no European power can dare to challenge this monopoly of the Portuguese. And through Cartes Cabral system, they continued to enjoy the monopoly for 100 years. Initially, their headquarters was Kochi. Later, it was shifted to Goa. The first governor, D. Almeida, was a visionary governor general His policy was to focus only on trade and commerce rather than establishing a political empire in India. That is why his policy is also nicknamed as Blue Water Policy. Guys, just keep in your mind, it was the second governor, Albuquerque, who deviated from this Blue Water Policy and laid the foundation of Portuguese political empire in India. He defeated the king of Bijapur and captured Goa, king of Gujarat, and finally Daman and Diu were captured. Gradually, they captured the whole sea coastal areas lying on the western sea coast. In this 100 years, they failed to get the goodwill of the Indians. That is why Portuguese, although they have a good opportunity, they failed in the long run due to this narrow-minded policy. They forcibly converted the Indians, forcibly married the Indian girls to increase the population, and they put restrictions on the Indian customs and festivals. Otherwise, if they could be broad-minded at the English, like the English, then our history could be not BHI, British History of India, it could be PHI, Portuguese History of India. India is such a large country, you cannot govern unless you have the goodwill of the Indians. In this way, we can say Britishers were highly visionary. They know the art of governance. As they came late, but they gradually succeeded in evolving a all India empire. So guys, Portuguese contributed in the way they introduced some new crops in India like potato, papaya, tobacco, red chili, pineapple, and lastly they also brought printing press in India, which was a turning point. But India was governed by the Mughal king Akbar, and this printing press was meant to publish the copies of Bible, not newspapers or textbooks. Gradually, once the monopoly is over, 100 years is over, they were challenged by the Dutch and the English. The whole Southeast Asia was lost to the Dutch. In India, they got defeated by the English, especially in 1612 by British Captain West near Arabian Sea. And it was again a turning point. It had changed the minds of Jahangir, and Jahangir realized instead of having friendship with the Portuguese, now the time has come to make friendship with the English. So guys, after Portuguese, we find the next company which entered into trade and commerce with India was Dutch. Again, the Dutch company was a private company which took birth in 1602. But the Dutch were more interested in Southeast Asia rather than India. Their first settlements in India was established in 1605 at Masulipatam. And gradually they made in Bengal Chinsura, then Nagapattam near Chennai, Pulikat, which is famous lake. Near the Pulikat lake, they made a famous fort called as Gilderia. And this fort became the capital of the Dutch in India. But guys, when Aurangzeb captured Bijapur and Golconda in 1686-87, Dutch believed that now the headquarters is no more safe. They shifted the capital from Pulikat to Nagapattam. But the history of Dutch in India is very precise. They only promoted the export of textile from the eastern coast of India. Indian textile is going to the Southeast Asia, and from Southeast they are promoting the export of spices to the Europe. Hence, it can be called as a type of barter trade. And finally, in 1825, they were forced to give their possessions in India to the English. After Dutch, we have Danish company from Denmark. Danish company took birth in 1616. But Danish company was no more popular because it was having a neutral stand. It was not having a political ambitions like Portuguese, Dutch or the English. The Danish company, which took birth in 1616, established the first center near Chennai at a place called as Tranquebar in 1620. In 1676, they established their center in Bengal at Serampore and some centers in Andaman Nicobar Islands. Again, Danish company, just like the Dutch, sold off their all settlements to the English in 1845. Hence, the history of Danish company in India is very limited. Guys, again, a company like Swedish East India Company also entered into the eastern trade. The Swedish company came very late. This company was established in 1731. If the arrival of the company is asked, just keep in your mind, Swedish were the last to come. This company took birth in 1731. Instead of focusing on the Indian trade, they focus their trade with China. They are purchasing Chinese silk, tea and rice, and they were taking it to Europe. And the history of Swedish company in India is missing basically. This company has history only with the perspective of China. And regarding English company, which took birth in the summer 1600, and the main architect were John Watt and George White. Originally, the name of the company was the Governor and Company of Merchants of London, trading with the East Indies. It was a private company. Its first mission in India was in 1608 under leadership of William Hawkins. But since the King Jahangir was under influence of Portuguese, it failed to get any privilege to establish any settlement in the Mughal Empire. That is why in 1611, they made their first center at Masulipatam. But here English got a message that it is only after defeating the Portuguese they can change the minds of Jahangir. And the same happened in 1612 when the English captain Best defeated the Portuguese fleet in Arabian Sea. And now Jahangir witnessed the writing on the wall. He realized sooner or later he had to compromise with the English. And finally he made up his mind. And the English company established its factory at Surat in 1613. So guys, here we use the word factory, but exactly it is not factory as such. Then why it is called as a factory? Because it is called as factory, it got the name as factory because it was simply a storehouse where they used to put the goods after purchasing from the Indian manufacturist. It is called as factory because the lowest servants of the English company, they were called as factors. And the factors are purchasing the goods, they are storing at a place, it become a name as factory. And the second ambassador, Thomas Roe in 1614, got success in receiving the privilege from Jahangir. And finally, English settlements established in different parts of Mughal Empire. For example, in 1633, the first eastern settlement was established at Haripura and Balasore in Odisha. In 1651, it was Hooghly. But this year 51 is very important because in the same year, the governor of Bengal, who was a son of Shahjahan, named as Shah Shuja, granted a historic firman to the English company, where company was allowed to pursue duty-free trade in Bengal after paying a lump sum amount of 3,000 rupees per annum. So guys, you can see from here that right from starting, company was having some malinterest in Bengal. They acquired this duty-free trading right in Bengal in 1651. And later in 1639, they laid the foundation of a new city, Madras, where St. George Fort was established. Similarly, in Bengal, in 1690, they laid the foundation of a new city, Calcutta, by Job Charnock, on the foundation of three villages, Sultanati, Kalikata and Govindpur, where they were enjoying some trading privileges. The three villages became Calcutta. And in mid of 1690s, they made a famous Fort William, whose first president was Charles Eyre. Guys, here an important development had taken place. And a question may arise. Who was the first Englishman who had aspired for a political empire in India? So there were two brothers, Josiah Child and John Child. The first was a governor of the company, and his brother John Child was in India. He was the president of Surat and also deputy governor of Bombay. And I think you may be aware, Bombay went to the English company. First it went to the British prince as a dowry, and the prince is transferring Bombay to the English company in 1668. on a nominal rent of £10 per annum. So here, these two brothers called as Child brothers, Josiah Child and John Child, they aspired to lay the foundation of political empire in 1686-89. They captured Bombay and also in Bengal they denied to pay the duties, and since the king was capable, Aurangzeb was there. Although he was busy in Deccan, at this occasion Aurangzeb was busy in Deccan against Bijapur and Golconda. And these brothers, John Child and Josiah Child, thought it is a good opportunity. And guys, if they could have got success at this occasion, then the Battle of Plassey could be missing in the history of India. British rule could have started from here itself instead of 1757. But fortunately, the governor of Bengal, Sahiste Khan, who was a maternal uncle of Aurangzeb, was a capable governor. He was ordered to take a strict action in Bengal. Similarly, in Bombay, the naval forces of Aurangzeb, which were commanded by Siddhis of Janjira, they became offensive, and the Britishers were forced to surrender. But Aurangzeb later gave them pardon, and they apologized for this mistake, and they made a promise that in future they will never interfere and they will never aspire for such type of mistake. The English company continued in this way, and later, when Aurangzeb died in 1707, then we have series of Mughal kings who were incapable. And guys, it is not a democracy, it is a monarchy, where everything is centralized. It depends upon the capability of the king. And just after Aurangzeb, you find that the Mughal nobility became more ambitious. We find that some ambitious governors of Hyderabad, Bengal, Awadh, they challenged the masters. They took royal titles and they made their state as semi-autonomous. And only the rest, they gave respect in theory. Although nobody is calling him as King of India, they are taking local titles. At the same time, we have some rebellious state like Jats of Rajasthan, Bharatpur, Marathas, Sikhs. So guys, in the early 18th century, the Mughal nobility got divided. We have factionalism, and finally the king became the puppet. You may be aware, Sayyid brothers was the most influential group commanding the nobles of who were called as Indian Muslims. Nizam ul Mulk Jah was controlling the other group. Sadat Khan was controlling the other group. And just after Aurangzeb, from 1712 till 1740, almost 20 years, Sayyid brothers were playing the role of kingmakers. As the Mughal king became the puppet. So, guys, these all grounds developed political ambitions in the minds of the English company. And finally, we have a Farman of 1717, which is called as a Magna Carta, because it was very historic. Its consequences were very far reaching. The Mughal king Farrukh Shah granted the Farman to John Sherman, who was an ambassador. And John Sherman, who was accompanied by a physician called as William Hamilton, first treated the king who was suffering from some disease. And Farrukh Shah got so delighted, so obliged. He gave the company a very historic privileges, and he was not aware what type of power he is giving to the company. For example, the Farman of 1717 refers like this, that the Bengal privileges will continue as it is. Along with this, the same privilege was given in Surat and Hyderabad in lieu of rupees 10,000 per annum. Secondly, English company can mint its currency in India. See how a sovereign king is compromising with his power. No capable sovereign king will give this power to any foreign company to mint his currency in India. It is clearly a compromise on his sovereignty. Along with this, he also gave some land ownership right near the villages of Calcutta. So guys, this Farman can be called as a driving force which had promoted the company's court of directors to work for political ambitions. And just after 40 years of this Farman, Battle of Plassey is going on. Now the next company is the French company. Birth is 1664, where the king was Louis XIV, very capable king. He is the first king who had centralized the whole France. And for this, he kept a permanent army, first time. And to maintain the army, he wanted to increase the revenue. That is why his finance minister, Colbert, advised him to make some company. Hence, French company was a government company. Birth is 1664. And it's made its settlements in India, different places. In 67, the first center was at Surat. 69, it was Masulipatam. It is just reverse of English. English settlement is first Masulipatam, then Surat. French is first Surat and next is Masulipatam. Other settlements were Muzaris, Yanam, Chandranagar in Bengal, Mahe in Kerala, and Pondicherry was made as headquarters. The architect of Pondicherry was Franco Martin. And finally, the English and the French emerged as a serious competitor to fill the political vacuum which India was witnessing in the mid of 18th century. And in this mid of 18th century, we find English and French got involved into the famous war which is called as Carnatic Wars. First Carnatic War is going in 1746-48. Although the trigger factor was Austria, it was going for the occupation of Austria. This battle is very historic because when the battle was going on in Carnatic, a local battle called as Battle of Saint Thome in 1746 between the French army led by Captain Paradise and the son of Nawab of Carnatic, Mahfuz Khan, who was an ally of the British. British lost the Madras fort. Hence, Nawab sent his army of 10,000 soldiers. Guys, the French army having around 1,000 soldiers defeated this large army, which was 10 times of the Indian army. Hence, this Battle of Saint Thome can be called as a turning point, having a far-reaching consequences. It exposed the numbers of the Indian army. It exposed the significance of the light infantry held by the European companies. The first two Carnatic wars were indecisive. Both parties were at par. But guys, the third Carnatic war was deciding. In India, it came to end in 1760 by Battle of Vandy Bosch. And since the locality is Carnatic, the Vandy Bosch is in Carnatic. Today it is in Tamil Nadu near Chennai. And today Vandy Bosch is called as Vandavasi. At Vandy Bosch, the French commander was Count de Lally. At this occasion, the French governor was Godieu. Mind it, in the first two Carnatic wars, the French governor was Dupleix, who was a very capable officer. Till he was in India, English couldn't succeed over the French. But when the war was going on, the French king was Louis XV, who was very incapable. That is why he appointed the corrupt officers. And finally, the French suffered very badly in India. Then this Vandy Bosch, the French commander Lally got defeated by the English commander Ayre Coute. And the Vandy Bosch battle was very historic in the way. At least this battle has proved that who will not govern India. It means that now the French were outside the race. Okay, guys. Here we are putting the end to this lecture of European commerce. Tomorrow, I will discuss the nature of 18th century, disintegration of Mughal Empire, and the rise of English company as sovereign political power in North India. Okay, wish you all the best.